In the dying days of 1861, the American South was trembling on the edge of war and collapse. Yet in the swamps and fields of South Carolina, chains still clattered in the dark, and the cruel rhythm of slavery beat on as if nothing could ever silence it. Among the sprawling acres of Ashwood Plantation, where cane fields glistened like false jewels at dawn, lived a woman whose spirit had not been broken. Her name was Mercy, 28 years old, scarred by the whip, marked by grief, but carrying a fire that no overseer's lash could extinguish. Her master, Elias Drayton, ruled Ashwood with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. He stood each morning on his polished porch as if the sun itself had risen only to honor him, watching rows of bowed backs toil in the dirt. He thought Mercy was just another body bound to his land, another voice that would never dare to rise against him. But he was wrong. On one storm-struck October night, Mercy's hands turned from servitude to vengeance. In a single act, she shattered the order of Ashwood, killing her master and leading a desperate revolt that would free 40 enslaved men, women, and children. Their flight through storm, swamp, and blood is a story America tried to bury, but it still breathes, whispered in the shadows of history. This is not just a tale of violence. It is a testament to courage, to rage forged into resistance, and to the unbreakable truth that freedom is never given, it is taken. Before we dive into Mercy's story, let us pause for a moment. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. The day at Ashwood began the way it always did, with the sound of chains dragging across packed earth. Not hurried, not loud, but steady, like the dull heartbeat of a place that had been built on stolen breaths. It was the rhythm of bodies moving before sunrise, and of hands hardened long before they had ever held a spoon. For generations, the same sound had rung through the slave quarters, and for generations, the sun had risen not to offer warmth, but to remind them of another day of toil. Inside the dim barracks, Mercy wrapped a strip of cloth around her wrist, where the overseer's lash had torn skin the day before. She did it without flinching. Pain had long since become familiar. So familiar, it no longer surprised her, only reminded her that she was still alive. Alive, and waiting. When she stepped outside, the morning fog clung low to the cane fields, beads of dew hanging heavy on each stalk. To someone passing by, it might have looked beautiful, like pearls scattered across the earth. But to Mercy, they were sweat stolen from her people, held captive by the soil they worked but would never own. From the white-pillared house at the top of the slope, Elias Drayton emerged, dressed in cream-colored linen, his boots polished to mirror shine, a cigar smoldering between his lips. He liked to stand there in the mornings, surveying the fields as if they existed to gild his wealth. Behind him, the shadow of cruelty lingered in the form of Wardell, the overseer, broad-shouldered, eyes hard as flint, and never far from his coiled whip. Wardell was the arm of Elias's will, the reminder that disobedience had a price. Mercy Wardell's voice cracked the air like the lash itself. "Kitchen," she did not answer. She never did. Barefoot, she walked up the slope toward the house, silent, steady, carrying herself with the kind of quiet defiance that no man could break. His eyes followed her, the same eyes that had watched her since she was 13. But those eyes no longer scared her. She carried something deep inside now, a secret ember that even Wardell's whip could not reach. The kitchen was thick with the smell of wood smoke and fatback. Steam rose from iron pots, carrying the heavy scent of meat and onions. At the stove stood Simon, the white cook, mumbling curses under his breath. "Harvest feast," he grumbled, slamming down a ladle. "Whole county's coming," every mouth wanting more than its fill. Mercy set to work without a word, moving with practiced speed. She chopped, stirred, fetched water, all with a face as blank as stone. But behind that mask, her eyes were sharp, noting every knife's place on the table, every jar on the shelf, Every tool that in the right hands could turn into a weapon. It was then that Jonah, the blacksmith, slipped through the back door. His arms were thick and scarred from years at the forge, his face dark with soot and silence. He carried a small bundle, set it near the hearth without a word, and left as quickly as he came. Later, when Mercy opened it, she found a thin metal file, a length of cord, and a corked vial no bigger than her thumb. Her lips did not curve into a smile. Smiles could betray her. Instead, she tucked the bundle deep into her apron and kept her face still. That night, when the day's work was done, the quarters buzzed with whispers beneath the watchful silence of the moon. Mercy sat among the others, the air heavy with sweat, smoke, and the faint sweetness of cane drifting from the fields. Nora, the old woman they called by a name not her own, rocked slowly in the corner, chanting words in an African tongue most of them didn't know but somehow felt in their bones. Mercy leaned close. 3 thunders, she whispered. Nora's eyes stayed closed, but she repeated it. 3 thunders. The words seemed to settle into the room like stones dropped into still water. It was the signal. On the night of the harvest banquet, when the storm broke over Ashwood, the 3rd clap of thunder would be their mark. That was when it would begin. Across the room, Zacchaeus, an elder whose hands were steady despite the years, sat sharpening a short blade. The rasp of stone against steel filled the silence. "Once you start," he said without looking up, "there is no turning back." Mercy met his gaze. "There is no turning back from where we are." The quarters fell silent. Outside, the night pressed in heavy and restless. Somewhere beyond the cane, a whip cracked. Not here, but close enough that every spine stiffened. Later, on her thin mattress, Mercy stared at the rafters, her chest burning with fire. She thought of the 40 faces she had counted, 40 souls, 40 breaths, 40 bodies that deserved to be free. She thought of Ruth's baby, still nursing, and young Ben, who moved quick as smoke and never seemed to make a sound. She thought of their small hands clutching older ones in the dark. The fire inside her had been banked for years, hidden and waiting. She knew the storm was coming, and when it broke, it would ignite more than the cane fields. It would ignite the promise of freedom. Dawn rose gray as pewter, the sky swollen with rain that would not fall. Mercy drew water at the well when Wardell's boots crunched into the mud behind her. His whip swung idly at his side, like a thought he might act on at any moment. "You were slow yesterday," he said. It was a lie. She was never slow. She kept her eyes on the bucket in her hands, watching the water tremble, catching his reflection. "Don't make me remind you what happens when you get lazy," he said softly, calmly. And calm was worse than rage. It meant he was deliberate. He leaned closer. "I'll be watching you." She did not answer. Some words were meant to be kept in the throat until the day they could come out like a blade. By mid-morning, she was back in the kitchen. Simon cursed at hens that wouldn't lay and bread that rose too fast. Jonah came under the guise of fixing a door hinge, hammer tapping softly. Without looking up, he murmured, "2 locks on the back gate, weakest ones near the cane shed, rust in the hinge." Mercy stirred the pot in slow circles. "How weak? With the right leverage, it breaks quiet. But you'll need someone there. Someone quick." "Ben," she whispered. Jonah frowned. "He's just a boy. He's a boy who moves like smoke, and no one notices smoke until it chokes them." Jonah didn't argue. He only nodded once, and the plan moved forward. That night, after supper, Mercy gathered the trusted ones. Zacchaeus drew maps in the dirt, marking gates, sheds, and the swamp road. Nora shook her head when he pointed to the long route. "Old bones and babies can't run that far," she said. "Then we take the short way." Mercy answered. Jonah would break the lock. Zacchaeus would lead the first group. Nora would keep the children close. And Mercy, along with Jonah, would stay behind to guard the rear. No one spoke Wardell's name, but it hung over them like thunderclouds. He would give chase, and he would not be alone. From her dress, Nora produced a bundle of roots knotted with red cloth. She pressed it into Mercy's hands. Boil it in his wine. Not all of it. Just enough to slow his blood. Mercy wrapped it tight and slipped it under her clothes. 3 thunders, she said, and they echoed it back like a prayer. 3 thunders. The days before the banquet crept by in a rhythm that felt both ordinary and unbearable. The same chains clinked in the morning mist. The same cries of the whip split the air. The same taste of ash lingered in the mouths of those who bent under Elias Drayton's empire. But beneath that ordinary cruelty, something extraordinary was forming. Each day's toil was only a mask. Each night, in the shadows, their hands shaped the future. Ezekias sharpened his blade until it sang against the stone. Every stroke whispering of the life he meant to take. Ruth stitched scraps of cloth into the lining of her dress, hiding away bits of dried meat and water gourds. Ben, quick as a sparrow, practiced slipping latches in silence until his fingers moved with a thief's grace. Even the old ones who could not run far gathered herbs, whispered blessings, and taught the children not to cry when thunder rolled. Mercy worked the kitchen as always, but her mind ticked to a different clock. The plantation had its own cruel rhythm horns, whips, bells, but Mercy carried a second clock inside her chest, one that counted down to the banquet. When Simon, the cook, cursed at rising bread or muttered about salt barrels running low, she hardly listened. Her eyes stayed fixed on the shelf where Elias kept his private wine, the dark glass gleaming like the promise of judgment. Wardell, sharp as ever, seemed to sense that something was stirring, though he could not name it. One afternoon he stopped her outside the kitchen, boots muddy from the field. His whip dangled loose at his side. "Elias says you'll serve table," he said, watching her face for fear. Mercy only nodded, her gaze empty as stone, but inside, her pulse quickened. Serving table meant she would be near his cup, near his lips, near the moment the roots Nora had given her could seep into his blood. That night, as rain threatened in the distance but refused to fall, Mercy lay awake. She thought of her years at Ashwood, lashes on her back, screams in the dark, children ripped from arms, too weak to hold them. She thought of her mother's voice, barely remembered, whispering words she could not recall but understood all the same. "We were not made to kneel forever." When she closed her eyes, she saw its storm clouds piling high, thunder shaking the earth, and 40 souls stepping into freedom. The morning of the banquet dawned heavy and wet, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. Far in the distance, thunder muttered like a warning. Ashwood stirred earlier than usual. Servants hurried across the yard with baskets of corn, barrels of cider, sides of pork. The house came alive with the scrape of chairs, the clink of crystal, the smell of roasted pheasant and spiced ham. In the kitchen, Simon barked until his voice was hoarse. "Keep it moving faster. Girl, Elias wants the table set like Paris." He slammed pots and cursed the heat, but Mercy barely heard him. She moved between chopping, stirring, fetching, her hands steady, her eyes darting again and again to that one shelf. The vial of roots weighed heavy in her pocket, pressing against her like fate itself. By noon, carriages rattled up the gravel drive. Silk skirts brushed the steps. Brass buttons gleamed in the sunlight. Laughter, sharp and careless, drifted from the hall. Men who had never bowed to anyone raised their voices over goblets of wine, while their wives smirked with painted mouths and gloved hands. The dining hall shimmered with silver and crystal, as though wealth itself could be polished into morality. At the head of the long table sat Elias Drayton's carved chair, its vines and flowers mocking the fields that had built his fortune. Wardell hovered near the doorway like a hound scenting blood, his eyes sweeping the room, and sometimes lingering on Mercy. Her moment came when Simon sent her to fetch the master's wine from the pantry, alone in the dim light. Her fingers shook only once, She worked fast, uncorking, pinching a measure of dried root into the dark red liquid, swirling until the poison vanished into the wine. The smell was unchanged. The surface shivered once, then stilled. She sealed the cork and smoothed her skirt, carrying the bottle back with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. By evening, the hall roared with feasting. The air swam with roasted meat, spilled cider, and smoke from 100 candles. Mercy moved through the room like a shadow, serving, refilling, clearing plates, always circling back to Elias's cup. He drank deep, his cheeks flushing, his arrogance glowing brighter with each swallow. The first thunder rolled low and long, rattling the glass in the windows. Guests laughed nervously, glancing at the storm. The second thunder cracked harder, sharp enough to still the laughter. The candles flickered, their flames bowing as though to some unseen power. Elias raised his cup again. His hand trembled slightly as he set it down. Mercy's heart pounded. The third thunder split the sky like judgment itself. In that instant, the air changed. Outside, the sound of a lock giving way echoed faintly through the rain. Ben at the cane shed, Jonah close behind. Inside, Elias coughed. Once, then again. Harder. His eyes widened, and for the first time in years, Mercy saw something in him she had never seen before: doubt. The storm broke overhead, rain hammering the roof, shutters slamming in the wind. Elias staggered to his feet, one hand clutching the table, the other pressed against his chest. His goblet toppled, red wine bleeding across the white tablecloth like a wound. Wardell shouted for him to be carried away. Guests screamed, forks clattering to the floor. But Mercy heard none of it. Her ears were tuned to another sound, the creak of the gate swinging open, the rush of feet on wet earth, the breath of 40 people stepping into the night without chains. The third thunder still hummed in her bones. The revolt had begun. The storm swallowed Ashwood whole. Rain lashed against the shutters. Thunder shook the rafters, and lightning carved the fields into jagged flashes of light and shadow. Amid the chaos of the banquet, Mercy felt her pulse steady. For months, she had dreamed of this moment. Now, it was no longer dream but fire and blood, crackling in the night. The hall erupted in confusion. Silks swept across the floor. Chairs toppled. Voices collided in panic. Wardell shoved his way forward, his eyes searching through the haze of candle smoke and rain. But by the time he reached Elias, the master's lips were pale, his eyes unfocused, his chest heaving like a man drowning on dry land. Mercy's gaze held his for a fleeting moment, and she thought not of fear, not of pity, but of every lash, every scream, every stolen child that had fed his power. She turned away. The sound she listened for was not his dying gasp, but the chorus outside, the first cries of freedom breaking loose. A shout rose from the yard. Then another. Then 40 voices carried on the storm. No longer whispers. No longer chained. Wardell's hand flew to his whip. He saw her then, standing calm amid the panic. Tray slipping from her hands with a crash of silver and wood. He snarled, "You!" But before he could strike, Jonah burst through the back door, soaked to the bone, his chest heaving. "It's open," he shouted, voice cutting through the storm. "Move." Ruth appeared at Mercy's side, clutching her baby close, eyes wide but burning with resolve. As Zacchaeus pushed through the press of bodies, guiding 2 children with his steady hands, Ben darted ahead, quick as lightning itself. In the chaos, the feast dissolved into flight slaves surging from the quarters, slipping into the dark, pouring toward the broken gate like a river long dammed, now unleashed. Mercy grabbed Ruth's arm, pulling her through the mud as screams and shouts clashed behind them. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant she saw Elias crumpled on the porch, his fine linen stained dark, his face slack. The storm had claimed him. She did not stop. They ran, through rain that bit like needles, through cane stalks that whipped their faces, through mud that clung to their ankles like chains trying to pull them back. Ahead, the gate yawned wide. Beyond it, the fields stretched into the unknown, bordered by the looming black line of the swamp. Behind them came the sound of pursuit. Wardell's bellow carried through the storm, joined by the bay of hounds unleashed. Lanterns bobbed in the dark, swinging wildly as riders mounted and militia gathered. The hunt had begun. The fugitives pushed into the cane fields, the stalks tall as men, bending in the wind, hissing in the rain. Mercy's chest burned, but she did not falter. Ruth stumbled once, clutching her child tighter, and Mercy pulled her up, whispering through clenched teeth, "Keep moving. Don't look back." Yonah, his hammer arm swinging, urged the stragglers onward. Ezekias, knife flashing, guided the younger ones through narrow rows where the cane broke easier. Ben slipped ahead, his small figure weaving between stalks, almost invisible in the storm. But the hounds were close, their howls sliced through the rain. Desperate, hungry, trained for flesh. Jonah slowed, crouching near a ditch. He pulled from his belt 2 sharpened stakes and drove them into the mud, angled just so. When the first dog lunged through the cane, its yelp split the night, cut short by a sudden, wet silence. The other hounds skidded back, whining, confused. The hunters cursed, their voices sharp in the storm. Still, the danger thickened. Wardell himself crashed through the stalks, whip snapping like lightning, his face twisted with rage. He spotted Jonah and charged, but the mud betrayed him. His boots sank deep, dragging with each step. Jonah swung an iron ladle he had carried from the kitchen, striking sparks as it collided with Wardell's belt buckle. Wardell staggered back, howling, but he did not fall. "Go," Jonah roared. "Take them to the swamp." Mercy pulled Ruth forward again, leading the others into the dark line of trees where the earth grew softer, wetter. The swamp's breath met them, a rank mix of moss, decay, and still water that mirrored the lightning above. For some, it was a place of fear, filled with snakes and shadows. For Mercy, it was sanctuary. The swamp swallowed sound, confused sense, and punished pursuers as harshly as any blade. As they waded into the shallows, the mud rose to their knees, then to their waists. The children whimpered until Nora hushed them with murmurs of old words. Words carried across oceans, words that steadied hearts in the dark. Ben scooped handfuls of black mud and smeared it across his arms and face. "Dogs can't smell through this," he whispered. Mercy followed, covering her skin with the swamp's camouflage. Soon, every child was painted with the muck, their scent hidden beneath the wet earth. The rain eased to a steady curtain. The swamp grew quiet, broken only by the croak of frogs and the drip of water from cypress limbs. Lantern light flickered far behind, bobbing like ghostly stars in the mist. Wardell's voice carried faintly, cursing, commanding, vowing vengeance. Mercy tightened her grip on Ruth's hand, her other hand clutching a broken branch, sharpened to a point. Yonah, blood on his arm, trudged through the shallows at the rear, eyes scanning the shadows. Ezekias led the children along a ridge of roots, his voice calm even as the muck pulled at his steps. The swamp tested them, dragging at their limbs, whispering of unseen dangers in its dark waters. But it also protected them. It blurred their trail, dampened their scent, muffled their footsteps. For every danger it held equal promise. And so, through storm and swamp, they pressed on 40 souls, carving a path into the unknown. Behind them, Ashwood's feast lay in ruins. Before them, the swamp opened like a gate to freedom. Treacherous but necessary. Mercy did not know if they would all make it, but she knew this. They had already begun to live differently, not as property, not as shadows, but as people who had chosen to run, to fight, to claim the night as their own. The first battle had been struck. Now came the war to survive it. The swamp stretched before them like a labyrinth carved from shadow and water. Every step sucked at their ankles. Every branch clawed at their skin. Every sound, whether frog, bird, or rustling leaves, carried the weight of dread. For some, it was the first time beyond the fields of Ashwood. The unknown was as terrifying as the whip they had left behind. But Mercy pressed forward, her body aching, her heart iron-bound. She knew hesitation could kill them faster than any overseer's bullet. The children grew restless, their small whimpers threatening to betray them. Nora moved among them, whispering lullabies in a language older than Ashwood, older than America itself. Her chants curled through the wet air like smoke, calming even the smallest babe. Beside her, Ruth clutched her infant so tightly, her arms trembled. But she refused to loosen her grip. Every mother's step was a vow this child would not grow up under the lash. Jonah took the rear, his broad shoulders hunched against the rein, one hand steadying Ezekiel's when the mud dragged him down. He bore not only the scars of iron and fire, but also the responsibility of the tools he carried: a hidden knife, sharpened stakes, the last traces of defiance hammered at his forge. He moved in silence, but Mercy could feel his vigilance, like a wall standing behind them. Hours dragged on. Lightning thinned. Thunder rolled away, and the swamp grew quieter. As if watching, lanterns still bobbed in the distance. The hunters had not given up. By dawn, their feet were blistered and raw, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. Ruth stumbled again, this time falling to her knees in the muck. Mercy pulled her up, whispering fiercely, "One step more, then another. If you stop, we all stop." It was Ben who spotted the smoke. He darted ahead, nimble and quick, waving them forward. "There's a fire," he whispered. "Not theirs. Different." They followed cautiously, fear twisting their guts. Fire could mean militia, but it could also mean what they prayed for: maroons. Through the thick palmettos, they founded a hidden camp nestled in the trees. Half-sunk huts of cypress and palmetto fronds, smoke rising in thin, careful streams. Figures moved quietly among the fires: men mending nets, women weaving baskets, children peering with wide, wary eyes. These were the Maroons, people who had escaped long ago, carving a life from the wilderness, invisible to the white world beyond. At the edge of the clearing, an archer appeared, bow drawn, arrowhead glinting in the dawn. "Name yourself," it demanded, his voice low but sharp. Ezekiel stepped forward, palms raised. "We come from Ashwood, 40 souls. We seek safe ground." Another figure emerged, a woman, tall, with her hair wrapped in bright cloth, eyes like stone and fire together. She studied them in silence, then spoke in a tongue that rippled like water over rocks. "To Mercy," she said. "You lead them." "I do." Mercy answered without flinching. "And you know what it means to live hunted." Mercy's jaw tightened. "I've known nothing else. Hunted or chained. I would rather be hunted." The woman's stare lingered, searching Mercy's face for something more than words. Finally, she nodded. "Come." Relief rippled through the group as they entered the clearing. Food was shared: roots, dried fish, water drawn from the cleanest pools. Children huddled by the fires. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks. Men stretched their limbs for the first time, without the fear of overseers watching. But peace was thin, fragile as cobweb. Before the night fell, scouts returned, dragging with them a prisoner, a white man, his lips split, his wrists bound. Blood dripped from his chin as he spat into the dirt. "They're coming," he growled, defiant even in capture. "Wardell, Pike. They know the name Mercy. They'll burn this place to the ground." The clearing stilled. Mercy felt every gaze turn to her. Her name, carried by enemies, had become a curse and a warning. Etched spoke first. Dogs don't rest when they've got the scent. The maroon woman's eyes narrowed. If you brought death to us, Mercy stepped into the firelight, her shadow stretching long across the ground. If they come, they will come for me. But I swear this, if you let us stay, if you let us fight beside you, we will not fall silent. We will not let them burn what you have built. Her voice was steady, steel wrapped in fire. The elders conferred in hushed tones, their faces lined with years of survival. Finally, one lifted a carved stick and pointed it at her. You may stay, but if they find us, you fight. Every one of you. Mercy bowed her head once. We will. That night, as the fugitives settled into corners of the camp, the weight of her vow pressed hard upon her. Ruth sang softly to her child. Jonah sharpened a spear by the fire. Nora scattered herbs into the flames, the smoke curling into strange shapes in the distance, faint and muffled. Hounds howled. The reprieve was short. The hunt was not over. It had only crossed into the heart of the swamp. The camp stirred long before dawn. The air was heavy with pine smoke and damp earth. And every sound, the snapping of a twig, the whisper of a child, felt too loud, too dangerous. The warning had already reached them. Wardell, Pike, and the militia were on the march. The hunters carried dogs, rifles, and the determination of men who would rather burn a forest than let their property slip away. Mercy stood at the circle of stones where the maroon elders kept their fire. Shadows stretched across her face, but her voice was clear. If they find this camp, they will not just take us. They will scorch every root, every hut, every memory you have built here. Tonight, we keep this place breathing. Jonah crouched beside the flames, shaping more sharpened stakes. His broad hands moved with the rhythm of a blacksmith forging iron. Only now the iron was wood and desperation. Ben and two older boys vanished into the trees, setting traps along the narrow paths into the swamp. Nora whispered incantations into the smoke, her herbs turning the flames blue, then green, as though the ancestors themselves leaned in to listen. The first bay of hounds came just past midnight. Lanterns flickered between the pines, jittering like restless fireflies. Wardell's voice cut through the dark. Mercy, come out now, and maybe the rest live. No one answered. Then Pike's voice followed, colder. Smoke 'em out. Ezekias moved silently along the perimeter, instructing the defenders hold until the last of the women and children disappeared deeper into the woods. Spears were passed hand to hand, bows strung tight. The few stolen muskets loaded with trembling fingers. The first dog burst from the brush, snarling, and straight into a snare. Its cry ripped through the camp. And then came the rush, the militia crashing in, rifle raised, eyes gleaming with firelight. Jonah met Wardell head-on, iron poker swinging like a hammer. Sparks flew as it clashed against Wardell's blade. Pike fired into the trees, bark exploding near Mercy's head. She moved low, knife flashing, heart steady. The clash was fast, brutal, and close. Shouts tangled with the screams of wounded men, the crack of rifles, the snap of whips. Jonah roared as Wardell's lash tore his shoulder, but he swung back, striking Wardell across the jaw with a sound like stone breaking. Pike raised his rifle again, aiming at Mercy, but she was already there, closing the distance, her blade catching firelight as it plunged forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. This was not vengeance for one night, but for every night. The dogs lay silent. The hunters faltered. The swamp seemed to turn against them, roots snagging boots, branches tearing flesh, traps bleeding their feet. Panic rippled through the militia. Retreat. Wardell's voice cracked, blood bubbling in his mouth. He stumbled backward, dragging Pike with him. Lanterns fell, sputtering, until the last light vanished beyond the ridge. The camp was still, Smoke curled through broken branches, the ground littered with spent musket balls, torn cloth, blood. The defenders stood breathing hard, weapons slick in their hands. The elders emerged from the shadows, their faces grave. "They'll be back," one said, "then we'll be ready." Mercy replied, though her fists still clenched tight. From beyond the swamp, faint and distant, a bugle call drifted on the wind. Not Confederate, Union. A new storm was rolling into the south, this one with armies. Not overseers. By dawn, the hunters were gone. The forest hummed with quiet again, as though the night's fury had been nothing more than a dream. But the bruises, cuts, and bloodied hands said otherwise. News traveled in fragments, carried by traders and scouts who slipped through backwoods. The Union Army pushed deeper into the low country. Confederate patrols thinned, plantations abandoned as owners fled north. Whispers rose, the old order was breaking. Mercy listened but trusted little. Freedom had been promised before, always by men far away. But this time, the bugle's echo was real, carried on the wind like a summons. That night, she made her choice. At dawn, she gathered Jonah, Ezekias, Ruth, Ben, and a handful of others. They would not run farther into the woods. They would not cower in shadows. They would return to Ashwood, to the house where lashes had sung, where chains had rattled, where Elias Drayton's cruelty had ruled like a false god. The journey back was silent. They retraced the same swamp trails that had saved them weeks before. The land felt changed, as though it, too, had tasted rebellion and would never forget. By midday, the roof of Ashwood loomed through the trees. No guards, no overseer, no dogs. The house stood hollow, its windows dark, its silence heavier than thunder. Inside, dust had already begun to claim the furniture, but the walls still smelled of smoke and candle wax, like the ghost of that final feast. Mercy walked the yard slowly, her eyes tracing every corner the cane shed. The punishment block, the very ground soaked with the cries of her people. Jonah struck the first spark. The dry straw caught quickly, flames racing up the shed, then licking across the porch, then consuming the roof. The fire rose like judgment, a column bright against the gray sky. They stood in silence as Ashwood burned, the heat painting their faces red, the crackle of collapsing beams echoing like drums. Mercy whispered, almost to herself, "The blood here won't feed Cain again." The house groaned, shuddered, and fell inward. Ashwood was no more. They turned back toward the swamp, the glow of fire still rising behind them, a warning, a promise, and a monument all at once. By nightfall, they were back among the maroons, the glow of Ashwood's ruins still visible on the horizon. No one asked questions, though every soul in the camp knew what had been done. The orange firelight against the clouds was answer enough. The great house that once ruled them had fallen to ash. Ruth lay her child down beside her with trembling relief. Jonah sat in silence, his broad hands scarred and weary, but steady. Ezekias stared into the flames as though he could see, not just fire, but a doorway opening into the future. Ben leaned close to Mercy, whispering, "It's really gone." Mercy nodded once. Gone, and it will never rise again. The swamp was quiet, but in that quiet there was something new. No overseer's horn, no lash, no bark of dogs, only the breathing of free people, alive together beneath the open sky. Their freedom was not yet secure. The war outside raged on, armies moving closer each day, but what Mercy and the 40 had carved out in storm and fire could never be taken back. They had shown that bondage was not destiny, that chains could be broken not by decree, but by the courage of those who bore them. History would later bend and twist their story, burying it beneath the noise of greater battles. But in whispers passed down through generations, one truth endured: Mercy had led 40 souls out of the graveyard of slavery. and she had lit a fire that no storm could extinguish. And so we tell it again. Because freedom is not a gift, it is a fight. If you want more hidden histories like this one, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this story so others can remember what was never meant to be forgotten.